The moon had no name worth keeping, only a number, and the number was the kind a man forgets the day he leaves a place alive. We called it Kessar 3. The order sheet called it a relay world. What it was, under the fog, was a grave that nobody had bothered to finish digging. We came down through the cloud deck in a battered lifter, 8 of us strapped into the cargo web, and the fog took the light away from us 1,000 meters up and never gave it back. By the time the skids touched the pad, we were flying on instruments and faith, and I had stopped trusting both. I have been a soldier long enough to know that the worst missions are the quiet ones. The loud ones tell you where the danger is. The quiet ones let you walk all the way into the middle of it before they say a word. My men called me Dutch. It started years back over something stupid, a card game and a borrowed coat, and it stuck the way good names do. My real name is on a service file in an archive that will outlive me, and that is the right place for it. To the 7 men who came down with me onto that pad I was Dutch, and that was enough. There was Blaine, who carried the heavy repeater the way other men carry a grudge, and who chewed a mineral stem that turned his teeth the color of old brass. There was Mac, who was the best shot among us and the closest to the edge, a man who had seen one campaign too many and kept walking anyway. There was Billy, our tracker, who said little and saw everything, who could read a corridor the way a priest reads a face. There was Pancho, steady as a load-bearing wall, who told the same 3 jokes on a loop until they became a kind of comfort. There was Hawkins, the youngest, our signals man, who told jokes that were not comforting at all and laughed at them before anyone else could. And there was Dylan. I had led these men across 4 campaigns and 3 borders, and I had buried fewer of them than I had any right to. And that record was the only thing in a hard life I was ever proud of. We were not heroes. We were a tool the inner worlds reached for when a thing needed doing in a place they did not want their names attached to. And we knew what we were, and we had made our peace with it the way a man makes peace with a knife he has carried so long it has worn a shape into his hand. 7 men and me. I knew the sound of each of their boots on a deck plate. I knew which of them slept and which of them only pretended to. That is the kind of knowing that keeps men alive in the field, and it is the kind of knowing that takes you apart later, one name at a time. Dylan did not belong to us. He had come up through the same hard school I had, years ago, and then he had gone sideways into intelligence work and learned to wear a clean suit. They sent him along as an observer, which is a word that means liar in any language. He told us we were here to pull out a recon element that had gone silent. Ramirez's team. 6 good men who had set down 2 weeks earlier to survey the station and had stopped answering their checks. A rescue. That was the story, and I knew within an hour of landing that the story had a false bottom, the way Dylan's stories always did. The station rose out of the fog like a thing that had been left to die standing up. It had been built generations back. In the first push outward, a relay node meant to bounce traffic across the gulf between the inner worlds and the frontier. The frontier had moved on. The relay had not. Its towers were furred with the gray creeper that grew everywhere on that moon, a pale climbing vine that drank the fog and choked the metal, and where the creeper had not reached, the hull had gone the brown-black of dried blood. Inside, the corridors ran wet. Condensation beaded on every surface and fell in slow drops that you heard before you felt, a steady, patient ticking, as if the whole place were counting down to something. The heart of it was a concourse the builders had called the concourse and the men who manned it had called the hall. It was a vaulted space 3 levels high, ribbed with structural arches, meant once to move thousands of travelers through on their way to somewhere better. Now it was empty. The fog seeped in through 100 breaches and pooled at the floor and turned the far end of the room into a wall of soft gray nothing. Our boots echoed. When we stopped, the echo kept going a half-second too long, and I told myself that was the architecture. We found Ramirez's team in the hall. Billy found them first because Billy found everything first and he did not call out. He just stopped and went very still and lifted his hand. We came up on him slow. They were strung up high in the structural arches, 6 of them, hung by their own gear from the ribs of the ceiling where the fog was thickest, so that at first they looked like cargo nets, like someone had simply stored equipment up out of the way. Then Hawkins put his lamp on them and nobody breathed. They had been skinned. Not all the way, not cleanly, but worked at, the way a man works at a thing he is in no hurry to finish. And the spines were gone. Each man had been opened along the back and the spine drawn out of him entire taken, and what was left hung loose and wrong, a shape that the eye refused to read as human until it did, all at once, and then could not stop. The skulls of two of them were missing as well. The others stared down through the fog with the patient blankness of the dead. Hawkins made a sound and turned away and was sick against an arch support, and nobody said a word to him about it, because he was 23, and there is no age at which that sight is bearable, but there is an age at which a man has built the walls to hold it, and Hawkins was years short of it. Mac said very quietly, "What does that to a man?" It was not a question. There is no answer to it that is also a question. I looked at Dylan. He was looking up at the bodies with an expression I had seen on him before in the old days, the one he wore when a thing had gone wrong in a way he had half expected. Not horror, calculation. He had known something might be up here. He had known, and he had sold us a rescue. Ramirez wasn't running a survey, I said. It was not a question either. Ramirez was confirming a contact, Dylan said. He did not look at me when he said it. We lost a freight hauler in this system 8 weeks ago. No distress, no wreck, no nothing. It just stopped being. Then the relay here went quiet. Then Ramirez. Command wanted eyes on the ground before they wrote it up. They wanted deniable eyes. He finally turned to me. "You were the deniable eyes, Dutch. I'm sorry. I argued against it. I have known men who lied for a living and learned to do it without a flicker. I do not know to this day whether that last part was true. It did not matter. We were down, the lifter would not be back for 30 hours, the fog would not lift, and something in that station had taken 6 trained men and unmade them one careful cut at a time, and was, I understood with a cold and total clarity, still there, watching. It had let us walk all the way into the middle of it before it said a word, and now it had said one. "Cut them down," I said. We could not. The bodies were rigged to the arches in a way that did not make sense, wired through with the men's own webbing in knots that ran back on themselves, and the more Pancho and Blaine worked at them, the more it became plain that we were meant to work at them, that the bodies were bait and the working at them was the trap, and I called the men off before I understood why, and was right too. We left Ramirez and his people hanging in the fog. I have carried that since. There was no choice in it, and I have carried it anyway, because a man does not get to choose which weights he sets down. We pulled back to the eastern arm of the station, a stretch of crew quarters and a galley with one door, and we fortified it the way you do, fields of fire and a watch rotation and the heavy repeater laid in on the corridor mouth. And we waited for the fog to give us back the sky and the lifter to give us back the gulf. We did not get either. What we got was the Skinner. That was Pancho's name for it, and it stuck, the way names do. Blaine went first. He was on watch at the corridor mouth, the repeater across his knees, and he was a hard man and a careful one, and none of that mattered. I was 30 feet away with my back to a bulkhead when I heard the weapon discharge, one long burst, the repeater chewing through a corridor it could not possibly miss in, and then nothing. We came up fast and found the gun still warm and Blaine gone. Not dead where we could see him. Gone. There was blood on the deck, a wide smear of it dragged toward the dark, and a scoring on the far wall where his rounds had gone home into something, because there was other blood there too, and the other blood glowed. I want to be exact about this, because it is the thing that turned the whole night in the end. The other blood was a thin, luminous green, the color of certain deep-sea things, and it ran in a track up the corridor away from us, bright in the dark, fatting slow. Billy crouched over it and did not touch it and looked at it for a long time. "It bled," he said. "Whatever it is, Blaine put rounds in it and it bled." He looked up at me and there was nothing soft in his face, but there was something I had not seen since we landed. "It bled. That means it dies." "Hold on to that," I told the men. "Hold on to that and nothing else. It dies." We stood the rest of that watch in a silence you could lean against. Every drip off the broken arches sounded like a footstep. Every shadow had a depth to it now that it had not had before, a question we could not answer. Pancho stopped telling his jokes. That was how I knew, more than the blood, more than the empty corridor where Blaine had been, that we had crossed into something none of us had a map for. When Pancho goes quiet, a thing has gone wrong in the world. But it did not die that night, and it did not die the next watch, and over the hours that followed it took us apart with a patience that I have never seen in a living thing and hope never to see again. It did not come at us in a rush. It came the way water comes through a hull, finding the weak seam, taking what it could reach and withdrawing before we could close. It saw in the dark. That was playing quickly. We cut our lamps to deny it a target, and it moved through the blackness like the blackness was a road built for it. It could go unseen even in the light. Max swore he watched the air bend, a shimmer like heat off a road, where there was no heat and should have been no shimmer, and then Mac put 6 rounds into the shimmer and the shimmer was gone, and so was a piece of the wall, blown out by a lance of light that came from no muzzle any of us could find. That was the other thing. It carried a weapon that did not need to be aimed by hand. A shoulder-mounted thing, we worked out later, that put a bolt of plasma wherever the hunter's eye fell, so that to be seen by it was to be struck. We learned to fear the small triple point of light, 3 red eyes that drifted in the dark and meant the lance was waking, and we learned that you had perhaps half a breath after you saw them, and that half a breath was not enough. It took Hawkins on the second day, if it was still a day. In that fog there was no telling. He had rigged a relay to try and raise the lifter early, climbed up into the station's spine to do it, and he was halfway through telling us over the squad net that he had a signal, his voice cracking with a boy's relief, when the net filled with a sound I will not try to describe and then went quiet. We found his rig. We did not find all of Hawkins. The spine was gone. I understood the bodies in the hall then. It was collecting. It hunted us not for food, not for territory, not for any reason a beast hunts, but for the taking itself, for the trophy, the spine and the skull, the proof. We were a season's game to it. It had crossed the gulf between stars to stand in a dead station on a nameless moon and hunt men for the same reason men have always hunted, because it could, and because the doing of it told it something it wanted to believe about itself. Mac broke after Hawkins, not loudly. Mac was too far gone for loud. He went quiet and certain, and that was worse. He told me he was going to go and find it, and I told him no, and he looked at me with the flat eyes of a man who has already left, and he went anyway off into the dark with his rifle and a fistful of grenades and a calm that was its own kind of madness. We heard him fighting for a while. He fought well, Mac. The flashes of his weapon lit the fog from inside far off, like lightning behind cloud, and they went on longer than I expected, long enough that I let myself hope. Then they stopped. We did not go after him. There was nothing to go after. I have made harder calls in my life, but I cannot remember when. Pancho went on a withdrawal, covering Billy, and he did it right. He did everything right, and being right did not save him, because the hunter did not fight the way men fight, and right was a human idea that did not bind it. The triple light found Pancho between one step and the next. He did not even finish the joke he was telling. I think about that. He died mid-sentence, and I will never know the end of a joke I had heard 100 times, and that is a stupid thing to grieve, and I grieve it. So it came down in the deep hours to 3, me and Billy and Dylan. Billy did not run. I want that remembered. When it became clear the thing was driving us, herding us back toward the hall the way a hunter drives game toward a kill ground, Billy stopped at a choke point, a narrow place where 2 corridors crossed under a low arch, and he set his rifle down. He took out the long blade he carried, a heavy thing meant for clearing creeper, and he stripped to the waist in the cold and the wet, and he cut a line across his own chest with the edge of it, a shallow red line, and let the blood run. "Billy," I said. "It hunts what runs," he said. "I'm done running. Go Dutch, I'll buy you the dark." I have refused orders in my life, and I have given orders I hated, and I have left men where they fell. I had never until that moment been ordered by a man under my command to leave him to die, and obeyed. I obeyed. I took Dylan by the collar and I pulled him back into the fog, and behind us I heard Billy meet the thing on his own terms, in the open, blade against whatever it carried. Two old predators settling an account the way the oldest law says it must be settled. He lasted a long time. He cut it. We found the glowing blood after, a great deal of it, more than any wound we had put in it yet, and a stretch of the arch torn down where Billy had made his fight, and Billy was gone the way the others were gone. But he had cut it deep. He had told it with the only language it understood that we were not what it had taken us for. It dies, I told myself. Billy proved it twice. It bleeds and it dies. Dylan and I made the haul. I do not fully know why I went there, into the kill ground, except that the hunter had been driving us there and I had decided, somewhere in the dark, to stop being driven and start arriving. If it wanted me in the hall, then I would come to the hall, but I would come as something other than game. Dylan was hit. I had not seen it happen, but he was hit, a deep furrow along his ribs, and he was going gray and slow, and we put our backs to a fallen arch and I bounded as well as I could in the wet. He laughed once, a small bad laugh. "They're going to write this up as a survey accident," he said. "Equipment failure on a relay world. 6 men and a recon team and an observer lost to equipment failure." He coughed. "I'm sorry, Dutch, for real this time. I'd have argued harder if I'd known what it was." "You didn't know what it was," I said. "Nobody knew what it was. There was nothing to know until now." "Now we know," he said. He did not last the hour. The triple light found us where we sat, drifting out of the fog at the high end of the hall, and I shoved Dylan down and rolled the other way, and the lance took the arch where our heads had been and showered us both in molten slag. When I came up, Dylan was not moving and the light was gone again, and I was alone in the hall with the thing that had killed 7 good men, and one liar I had once called a friend. I should have died there. By every measure of the night I should have died there, the last man, wounded and out of friends, in the room the hunter had chosen. And I sat in the slag heat with my back against the dead arch, and I understood, finally, all at once, the way you understand a thing only when there is nothing left to distract you from it. It saw heat. That was the whole of it. Everything it had done, the way it found us in the dark, the way it put the lance on Max Shimmer and Poncho's last step, the way it had never once missed a man and never once struck the cold deck or the cold wall except where a man had been. It did not see the world the way I saw it. It saw the warmth of living things written bright against the cold, and the station was cold, the fog was cold, the moon was a cold and dripping stone, and a man was a torch in the dark to a thing that hunted by fire. I was a torch. That was why I was losing. As long as I burned, it would always know where I was, and I would always know where it was a half-breath too late. So I put myself out. The station ran its old reactors on a coolant slurry, a heavy mineral mud the builders had pumped through the spine of the place to draw off heat, and where the lines had ruptured over the long dead years, the slurry had pooled. Gray and thick and cold, colder than the fog, cold as the dead stone of the moon. I crawled to the nearest pool of it and I stripped off my armor and my shirt, and I packed the cold mud over every inch of me, my chest, my arms, my face, my hair, working it into the creases and the hollows, until I was a thing the color of the floor and the temperature of the floor, until the torch went out. It was agony. The cold went into me like blades and I shook with it, and I made myself keep packing it on, because the cold that was killing me was the cold that was hiding me, and I would rather freeze unseen than burn in plain sight. Then I went to work on the hall. This is the part the order sheets will never understand, the part that no brief can write and no command can deny, the part that is ours and only ours. I had no weapon that could match its weapon. I had no eyes that could match its eyes. I had no strength that could match its strength, and I had watched it shrug off rounds that would have cut a man in half. What I had was a dead station, 100 years of decay, my own 2 cold hands, and the simple human refusal to be a trophy on anybody's wall. I worked in the dark and the fog by feel. I knew the hunter's habits by then, bought with the lives of 7 friends. I knew it favored the high arches, that it moved along the structural ribs above the floor, that it came down only to take. So I cut a structural cable from one of the failed arches, a finger-thick line of braided alloy still strong enough to hold tons, and I rigged it across the high run between 2 ribs where the fog was thickest, set to swing free, when a weight crossed a trip I strung at ankle height in the dark. I pried a slab of decking loose and balanced it on a wedge over the only dry path through the slurry pools, a deadfall that would drop a 1/4 ton of steel on whatever broke the line beneath it. I gathered the men's grenades, what I could find, max that he had not used, and I daisy-chained 3 of them into a fallen conduit and ran the pin wire back to a pole I could reach from cover. I smeared cold mud over the bright metal of every trap so the Hittais would not read them. And then I did the last thing, the human thing, the thing the hunter would not expect because the hunter did not understand us yet. I lit a fire. A small one, far across the hall from where I meant to fight, a heap of dry creeper and a fuel cell with the cap cracked, a bright warm beacon of exactly the kind a torch-blind hunter would read as a wounded man gone to ground. Bait. I gave it the thing it wanted. I gave it a target made of heat, and then I went cold and silent into the dark beside my traps and I waited, mudded and freezing and patient. And for the first time in 2 days, I was the one who could see in the dark, because I had become a piece of the dark, and the hunter could not. It came for the fire. I watched it come. With nothing burning on me to wash out my eyes, I saw it clear at last, the first clear look any of us had gotten and lived to keep. A tall thing, taller than a big man, broad through the shoulders, moving along the high ribs with a terrible fluid certainty, and where the light from the bait fire caught it the air resolved into the shape of it, armored, masked, its skull mask blank and patient, a cluster of long cabled cords falling from its head like the dead men's spines it had collected, as if it wore its hunting on its skin. It moved toward the heat of the fire with the lance waking on its shoulder, 3 red eyes opening in the dark, and it crossed onto the high run between the 2 ribs where the fog was thickest. It hit my trip. The cable swung free out of the fog with all the weight of the dead station behind it and took the hunter across the chest and flung it from the high run, and it fell. And as it fell it broke the line beneath the deadfall, and the 1/4 ton of decking came down on it where it landed in the dark, and I heard it scream for the first time, a sound like nothing that has any right to come out of a living throat, rage and pain and a terrible surprise. It had not expected to be hunted. In all the long seasons of its taking on however many cold worlds, it had never once been the game. I had told it, in the only language it understood, what it had walked into. It got up. Of course it got up. Nothing I had was ever going to be enough on its own. I had known that going in. But it got up wrong, dragging, the slab having broken something in it, and the glowing blood ran from it in the dark, bright and free, Billy's debt and Blaine's debt being paid at last, and it staggered out of the fog toward the only warm thing left in the hall, which was the bait fire, and which was nowhere near me. I let it pass. I let it come all the way to the fire and stand over it confused, hunting a man who was not there, and when it stood at last in the open with its back to my conduit, I pulled the pin wire and gave it max grenades. The blast threw it the length of the hall. It tore the mask from its face and tore the lance from its shoulder and tore the cabled cords from its head, and it lay in the slag and the fog with its weapon gone and its trophies scattered, and it did not get up fast this time. I came out of the dark. I do not fully know why I did not simply leave it there, broken, and walk to the lifter pad and wait for the sky to clear. I have turned that over for a long time. The closest I have come is this. It had taken something from each of my men, and I had decided, in the cold and the dark, that it would take nothing from me, and that I would not let the last word of that long night belong to it. So I came out of the dark, mudded and freezing and unarmed but for Billy's long blade, which I had taken up from the choke point where he fell, and I stood over the thing that had killed my people, and I looked at its face for the first time. It was an ugly thing. I will not pretend otherwise. The face under the mask was wrong in every particular, a mouth that opened the wrong way, eyes set too wide and too deep, and it looked up at me out of that ruined face with its small black eyes, and it knew, I am certain it knew, that the game had turned all the way over. And then it did a thing I did not expect. It lifted one broken arm slow, and it touched its own ruined chest where Billy's blade and my deadfall had opened it, and it drew its claw across the wound and held the claw up to me, glowing green, and it spoke. Not words. A sound, low and deliberate, the same sound shaped twice, and I understood it the way you understand a thing that needs no translation. It was offering me the mark, the blood of a worthy kill. It was telling me I had earned it, that I was, in the cold arithmetic of its kind, a hunter now, that it would die having been beaten by something that counted, and it was inviting me to take the trophy and wear the mark and become, in the taking, a little of what it was. It wanted me to claim it, to put its skull on my wall the way it had put my men's spines on the arches, to accept the frame it had built, where the world is hunters and game and the only dignity is in the taking, to become the next Skinner. I looked at it for a long moment. The fire burned low across the hall. The fog dripped its slow count off the broken arches where my men had hung. Somewhere out in the dark were 7 men who had told bad jokes and chewed brass-colored stim and red corridors like faces, and bought me the dark with their own lives. And not one of them had ever taken a trophy off anything, because they were better than that, because we are better than that, because the thing that makes us worth saving is the thing that will not do what the hunter does no matter how strong the doing would make us. I looked up once, at the broken arches and the gray fog and the long dark this thing had carried across the stars to lay over my people. And then I looked down at it, at the offered mark, the worthy kill, the invitation to be claimed and to claim. Not mine, I said. And I did not take the trophy. I did not claim it. I did not become the next thing in the long line of takers. I gave it the blade fast and clean, the way Billy would have, the way you put down a thing that is suffering and dangerous both, and then I stepped back and I left it whole, spine and skull and all. I would not collect it. It would lie in the hall as itself beaten, and I would carry away from that place nothing that belonged to it. No mark, no trophy, no piece of its frame in my head, because the moment I took the trophy was the moment it won, even dead, even broken, and I would not give it that. It made one last sound as it died. I think now it was the sound its kind makes when a hunt ends well by its own lights. A hard sound, almost satisfied. It died believing it had found on a nameless moon a worthy thing. I let it believe whatever it wanted. The dead do not get a vote in what the living carry. Then it triggered the device. I had not known it carried one until the wrist of it began to pulse, a hard white light climbing through a sequence, and Billy's old wisdom and a soldier's read of a doomsday glow told me all I needed to know about what came next. It would not be left to be studied. It would not let its body be taken any more than it had meant to be beaten. There would be a blast that would unmake the hall and most of the eastern arm with it, and there was nothing I could do to stop it, and so I did the only thing left. I ran. I ran the way Hawkins would have laughed at me for running, ugly and graceless and all out, mudded and half frozen and bleeding from a dozen places, down the wet corridors I had learned in 2 days of dying, out through a hull breach into the open fog, and I was 300 meters into the gray when the hall let go behind me. The blast lifted me off my feet and threw me face first into the cold mineral mud of the moon, and the light of it turned the fog white for one long instant, white as the inside of a cloud, white as nothing, and then it was dark again and quiet again, and the slow drip of the moon went on counting toward whatever it counted toward, and I lay in the mud and breathed. The lifter came 18 hours later when the fog finally thinned enough to find the pad. I was the only thing on it. I had spent the wait gathering what tags I could find of the 7 men, and Dylan's too, and I had them in my fist when the lifter touched down, cold metal warm from being held, and the crew chief looked at me, mud-caked and silent and alone, and did not ask. There are things a crew chief learns not to ask. They did write it up as an equipment failure. Dylan had that part right. A relay world survey, lost to systems decay, no recovery possible due to reactor breach. I let them. There was no language in any report that could hold what happened in that hall, and the men who would read it had earned the right not to know. The truth of it lives in me, and in 8 names I will carry until I set them down with the rest of my weights, and not before. People ask me sometimes, the few who know there is anything to ask about, how a man beats a thing like that. A thing that sees in the dark and walks unseen and across the stars to hunt us for sport. They want a trick to it, a weapon, a clever thing they can hold. There is no clever thing. The cold mud put out the torch, and the dead station gave me the cables and the slab in the dark, but those are just the tools, and the tools were never the answer. The answer was the part of me that would not lie down on the schedule the hunter had set, the part that turned and arrived instead of being driven, the part that looked at the offered trophy at the end of the longest night of my life, the thing I had earned by every law that creature lived by, and said no. Said it was not mine to take. Said I would rather walk out of that grave with empty hands and full pockets of other men's names than carry one piece of what the hunter was. That is the whole of it. That is all we are in the end, the thing that makes us worth the trouble of saving. Not that we are strong because we are not the strongest. Not that we see in the dark because we do not. Only that there is a line we will not cross to win, and that we will go into the cold and put out our own fire and meet the thing in the dark on its own ground and beat it, and then refuse the prize. The hunter never understood that. It died thinking it had found a worthy kill. It never once understood that the worthiest thing in that whole dead hall was the one decision it could not make, and I could. I kept Billy's blade. That much I took, not as a trophy, as a debt. It hangs by my door now, cleaned and dull, on a moon a long way from the one with no name, and on the bad nights I take it down and hold it and remember a quiet man stripping to the waist in the cold to buy me the dark, and I do not weep, because I am too old and too hard for it, and he would have hated to be wept over. I just hold the blade until the night turns gray, and then I put it back and I go on. That is the other thing nobody tells you. The hard part was never the hunt. The hard part is all the mornings after, when the fog has lifted and the sky is back, and you are the one who has to keep walking, carrying the names, putting out your own fire over and over so the dark has nothing to aim at, refusing, every single day, the easy prize of becoming the thing that broke you. Not mine, I told it. It still isn't.